For decades, psychotherapists have agreed on one central idea: the relationship between the counselor and the client drives clinical change. Yet for most of that history, that relationship has been completely invisible. Because clinicians couldn't physically see this connection, they relied on subjective metaphors to describe it. They talked about being on the same wavelength or feeling in sync with a patient. But human beings possess an involuntary biological system that constantly broadcasts our emotional states and stress levels, the autonomic nervous system. If the therapeutic connection is real, it should produce a physical signature. Researchers began to wonder if they could map this invisible relationship using biological data. Moving from subjective metaphors to physiological data offered a new way to observe the actual mechanics of the clinical encounter. In 1962, a researcher named Joyce published a PhD dissertation at Ohio State University that attempted to do exactly that. Her study relied on a specific diagnostic tool, the Galvanic Skin Response, or GSR, monitor. The device measures microscopic changes in the electrical conductance of the skin. When a person experiences emotional arousal or stress, their sweat glands activate, and electrical resistance drops. Labello's methodological innovation was to wire up the session itself. She attached GSR electrodes to both the counselor and the client simultaneously while they spoke. By tracking these dual physiological readouts side by side, her study aimed to uncover the hidden biological architecture beneath clinical interactions. To understand what the GSR data was looking for, we have to look at the conflicting theories of how a therapist is supposed to behave. Sigmund Freud established the early baseline. He argued the therapist must act as a dispassionate self-observer. He instructed clinicians to adopt a state of easy and impartial attention, deliberately detaching themselves from the patient's emotional turbulence. By the post-war era, humanistic theorists like Carl Rogers pushed back against this cold detachment. Rogers demanded deep, experiential involvement. He argued that genuine warmth and emotional mirroring were the actual catalysts for healing. Harry Stack Sullivan proposed a middle ground. He defined the therapist as a participant observer, someone whose own internal reactions are an active, necessary part of the process. This created a distinct research problem. Clinicians claimed they were acting as participant observers or impartial analysts, but there was no way to verify what they were actually experiencing in the room. These theoretical debates remain purely philosophical until they are tested against the biological reality of the people having the conversation. To test these theories, researchers first had to translate Carl Rogers' highly abstract concepts, like empathy and warmth, into strict, measurable variables. They took the first core condition, empathic understanding, and broke it down into an observable 7-point scale. A level 1 rating meant the therapist misses the point altogether or misunderstands the client. A level 7 required a perfect immediate grasp of the client's communication. They applied the same rigor to the second condition, congruence, which measures genuine openness. High congruence requires the therapist to be deeply aware of their own experiencing. A level 7 rating demands complete integration in the moment, without any internal defensiveness. Independent judges listened to raw audio excerpts from the counseling sessions. They evaluated the therapist's behavior and assigned a numerical score from 1 to 7 for each condition. The study then posed its central question: do these human evaluations of empathy and congruence actually correlate with the hard physiological data recorded by the GSR machines? Bridging humanistic theory with empirical measurement meant directly mapping subjective language onto objective voltage. This chart shows the raw, moment-to-moment electrical resistance during a single session, labeled Case A, Interview 3. The vertical axis tracks ohms, representing skin resistance and physiological arousal, while the minutes of the session progress along the bottom. There are two distinct data streams here. The client is represented by the solid line, and the counselor is the dashed line. Between the 15 and 30-minute marks, we see distinct physical synchronization. The counselor's physiological arousal closely mirrors the client's sharp spikes and sudden drops. This mirroring represents the literal, biological manifestation of Sullivan's participant observation. The therapist's nervous system is actively tracking the client's distress. Now look at this chart showing the data from a distinctly different session profile, Case B, Interview 10. The client's arousal levels are incredibly volatile, with massive, jagged fluctuations in electrical resistance throughout the hour. But the counselor's data line in this exact same session maintains a much flatter, detached baseline. They are not physiologically reacting to the client's stress. This flatline profile maps perfectly on Freud's model of the dispassionate, detached observer. This raw data forces a difficult clinical question. Does high physiological synchronization automatically mean the therapist is scoring high for empathy on the audio ratings? Mapping the data is only half the battle. Interpreting whether a synchronized chart indicates genuine empathy or dangerous over-identification is the true puzzle. Zooming out from the minute-by-minute chaos of a single hour, we can look at the macro-level trends of an entire treatment plan. This is an interview means chart. It plots the average physiological arousal for whole sessions over several weeks of therapy. Looking at Case A's long-term trajectory, the counselor and client means tightly intertwine. Over 9 sessions, their baseline arousal levels rise and fall together. This chart shows the macro view of Case B's treatment, which reveals a stark contrast. Over 10 sessions, we see severe divergence. As the client's average arousal steadily climbs toward the end of treatment, the counselor's arousal drops significantly. These macro charts allow us to visualize the physical evolution and sometimes the deterioration of a working relationship over time. Clinical progress cannot be judged by the data of a single interaction. It is defined by these long-term patterns of physiological alignment or divergence. To draw conclusions, researchers had to overlay the subjective audio ratings from the 7-point scales directly on top of the objective GSR measurements. The true innovation was this forced marriage of humanistic philosophy with strict biological empiricism. It is immensely difficult to force human judges to listen to audio excerpts and rate complex emotional states on rigid numerical continuums. But despite the methodological hurdles, this attempt laid the essential groundwork for modern biobehavioral research. Translating abstract warmth into units of electrical resistance provided an empirical framework for the study of clinical empathy. The analog equipment used in 1962 is primitive compared to modern fMRI machines and real-time neuroimaging. Yet the fundamental insights captured by Labella's study remain accurate today. When a therapist and a client truly connect, their autonomic nervous systems reflect that bond in the data. This physiological mirroring is a literal, observable record of a shared biological state between two people. The therapeutic alliance operates as a profound, shared physiological event.